Welcome to Meteor Interviews, a series of interviews with Meteor developers, community, and core team members. Today I'm speaking with Sam Hatoum. Sam is the founder of Zolvio, a consultancy that helps businesses deliver software quicker and of higher quality using testing and automation. He's also the author of the Meteor Testing Manual and a core member of the Velocity team, Velocity being the Meteor testing project. Welcome, Sam. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you.
My goal today is to learn about testing Meteor apps and the Velocity framework and find out more about what's in your book. So, I'm a huge fan of testing. I think it's really important for the development process. It might take some investment and learning if it's new to you, but helps you keep up a constant pace of development, and most importantly, it helps you refactor code without fear that you're going to regret it later. So I love what you guys are doing with the Velocity project. And before Velocity existed, you built RTD, one of the first test runners for Meteor. It's pretty clear that you've been into testing for a long time. So how did testing become such a focus for you?
So I started off as a developer, and I was a Java developer using Swing back in the day. And then through the years, I just progressed to become really involved in the Agile space. And one of the biggest tenets of Agile is testing. And so I worked with teams where the developers, I was actually one of those developers where we had to pair full time, and we were responsible for doing end-to-end delivery of a feature, including all the tests, the automated tests, and making sure that it gets followed all the way to production. And so with that was sort of the foundation of the testing. And then yeah, throughout all the other gigs that I got, which were either agile consulting or agile coaching or team leading, throughout my history, testing was always a major focus. And I didn't really know how much I was interested in testing until I came to write my application in Meteor, and I found that there was a big gap where I wanted to do the testing and it didn't exist. I loved Meteor, I loved what they were doing, but I had to have tests around my application. So I thought, well, I better write my own then.
Cool. So you built RTD,
That's right.
and then that became Velocity, and we'll get into the Velocity project in a minute. I'm wondering if we should maybe define some terminology that's probably going to come up. Do you want to talk about what the different types of tests are? Because I know we're going to get into that in a minute.
Sure. So the main types of tests are from a developer's point of view are end-to-end testing, integration testing, and unit testing. When you talk about end-to-end, you're talking about accessing the app in the same way that the consumer would. So if your consumer is the user from the UI, then you would write a test that exercises the UI, and that means that you're hitting the system from one end, and then the internals of the system are going to the other end and coming back. So they might be hitting a database and coming back. And what end to end really means is you're looking at your whole system as one big piece from end to end. And so the next level down, if you dig a bit deeper and you shift, sorry, let me just say one more thing, is when you consider the whole system end to end, we can call that now the system under test is end to end. So the SUT is end to end. Now you can change your focus and you can say, okay, I don't want my SUT to be end to end. I want my SUT to be a smaller section of the whole system. So if you pick a few units that are working together, then you consider testing them together, then you would consider that test an integration test. It is the test of the integration of multiple units together. An example of that would be a Blaze in Meteor land, a Blaze template talking to a publication that's on the server. So the combination of the publication and the template doing work together are an integration test, but it's not necessarily an end-to-end test because you may be stubbing out or faking the back end and not necessarily accessing the functionality through the front end. And then a unit test finally is the isolation of all code around a single piece of code, an isolated SUT. And that means that, say you've got one function and you want to test all the permutations of that function, you would do so through a unit test.
Okay, and in that unit test, you're gonna replace some of the other things that it depends on using some types of test doubles. There's various
That
names for that, and Maybe I don't know if we should get into that just yet. Maybe it'll come up in a minute, but I guess that's mocks and stubs and things. So so why test? What would be your argument to somebody that's just building an app and feels like it's going to be just an extra thing for them to learn or more work to do?
Right. So um, one of the biggest benefits of testing is regression, the prevention of regression. There is no magic bullet, like silver bullet, for not having bugs, right? You're always going to get bugs. But the best antidote we've got to stopping regression, or sorry, reducing regression, is writing tests. So today you might write some code and it's just you, one developer, you got this great idea, and you get this idea out the door and then it succeeds. And so a lot of people think about all the risks of failure, but they don't think about the risk of success. And the risk of success is that suddenly you get funded and suddenly you have a team with you that needs to, that you've got to get moving, and you try and scale your operation, you're trying to scale your business, and then your code can't keep up because you're introducing bugs along the way all the time. And so you end up either having to rewrite, and I can think of quite a few examples of companies that have done that after their first start. And you could have got around a lot of that by having a good set of tests.
Right,
So they really help with regression, and that's only one benefit.
right,
Um,
right. Okay. And yeah, and I would add to that just being able to feel good about your code, being able to change something that without worrying that you broke it, and and generally just keeping up your velocity of development, the speed, the pace of work. So so tell us about the Velocity project.
So Velocity was the product of a bunch of test framework writers that got together in a hangout that Robert Dickert did, and there was Mike Rissy, who wrote Mocha Web. There was Abigail, who did Test Harness. There was who else was there? There was Aaron Oda, who did Laker, and we all got in a room and on a virtual room, and we started discussing the landscape, the meteor testing landscape state, and then. I suggested, why don't we just all put our heads together instead of building 10 different frameworks, and just make one framework to rule them all and make it a really good experience for the user. And so that hit home with a lot of people, and then we ended up having a hangout every Thursday, and it's been going since this is I think May last year, or maybe around maybe April. I can't remember, to be honest. But it was sometime last year, and we've literally been meeting almost every Thursday since then. And the project has really come a long way. And so the roots of a lot of Velocity come from RTD. That's not to say it all comes from there, but RTD was supposed to be a very quick feedback cycle of, as you code, you get feedback in the same way that Meteor gives you feedback as you code, and you get the UI changing and reactive programming. So it was meant to do the same thing, but it had a lot of problems. And then Velocity came and solved a ton of those problems. We've introduced a ton of new ones, which we're trying to solve now. But it's a challenge to get something that's really reactive in the testing space, because so much goes on under the covers.
Cool. Yeah, I remember what it was like before Velocity. I mean, you really unified everything because it was kind of hard to know where to start before. There was a lot of choices to make. So Velocity is a framework for integrating other frameworks. Is that fair? Is that fair to say?
That's right. Yeah. So Velocity is a testing is a test. I like to think of it as a test runner, much the same as Karma is a test runner for the JavaScript world. And yeah, it allows framework authors to write a new framework using a standard set of APIs, and it gives you a common reporting to the user. So right now, there's the HTML reporter, which many of you have seen. Like, is that little dot? It's kind of become the signature of Velocity, if you like. But there's also other reporters like a console reporter, and Respondly are working on their own very pretty reporter, which will be out soon.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that's it. So it integrates other projects like Jasmine, Mocha, etc. So what are all the frameworks that you can use?
There's Jasmine, and that allows you to do unit and integration testing both on the client and server, and it also allows you to do end-to-end testing using a WebDriver package. So this Jasmine is kind of like the most complete out of all of them, but it doesn't do package testing. Then there's Mocha Web, which does integration testing only for client and server, but there's a branch right now that's allowing you to do package testing.
Right.
And then there is Cucumber, which allows you to do end-to-end testing using Gherkin syntax. And there is also Nightwatch, again, an end-to-end testing framework that uses a proprietary set of like wrappers around Selenium, so it makes Selenium easier. And there is more recently, Casper, the Casper JS implementation, and that's also an end-to-end testing framework. And then there's also the robot testing framework.
So there's
That's what
there's a lot.
there
So
is.
you've talked about Selenium and WebDriver. We've talked about some unit test frameworks, and we've talked about integration test frameworks and Cucumber as well, which we should probably touch on in a minute. But that's a lot of choices to make. So I'm wondering, what do you personally use? What combination of frameworks do you personally use, and why?
So I personally use a combination of Jasmine and Cucumber. I think Jasmine does a great job of allowing unit tests, and unit tests are the fastest running tests. So um, there's a there's this theory or guideline, if you like, called the testing triangle that says you should push as many tests as you can into the unit levels from the higher levels, and that's simply because they run much quicker. And so Jasmine is currently the only framework that allows you to do unit testing both on the client and the server. And so use Jasmine there, and then it also allows the integration testing. So you got one language that you can use across the stack. And then the reason I use Cucumber is because it's a way to specify to document your system specification using executable specification. So you write in English what your system does, and then you go and automate those English steps using like a Cucumber passes the English steps to like a regex to the code underneath, which allows you to automate the tests.
Right. And that's the Gherkin syntax you mentioned earlier.
Correct.
So Cucumber lets you write tests in plain English, and you use that for your end-to-end. Use that for your end-to-end tests.
That's right. Yeah. Now you can actually use it for integration testing as well, but I haven't added support for that in Cucumber.
Right.
And the disclaimer here is that I'm the author of the Cucumber framework.
Awesome. Okay. So have you considered? I mean, I know there's a lot of controversy, or not controversy, but I mean, there's a lot of people prefer Mocha. Some people prefer Jasmine. Have you thought about maybe blessing a stack just to make this the or recommending us like a particular combination just to make it easier for people to get started?
Yeah, so it's funny because this is something we've been speaking to the MDG about as well. The answer is yes. I think it's much needed. At the moment, I can only recommend to others what I use, and that's because of the reason of having lots of abilities, so you can do the unit and integration testing. If I was to start on a fresh project that is not Meteor, I would probably choose Mocha. And the reason I would choose Mocha is because it's more configurable and less opinionated. And you can plug in things like Sinon or chai assertions, or now chai as promised just came out, and you can just plug that in right on top of Mocha. And you can't really do that with Jasmine. So because Jasmine is really opinionated and it's an all-inclusive one, like this is how you do it, and it's a great framework. It has everything you need, but it's very much, a single way of doing it. So if in the wild if it non-Meteor wild, I would use Mocha, but in Meteor I'm using Jasmine. I would love to use Mocha in the Meteor world if it supported all the other modes of testing. And that's something actually that's coming up. So Mike and Jonas, the authors of the two frameworks, they've been talking, and no promises yet as to when or anything, but we're talking about creating a single base framework that can support all the test modes, and then you can plug Mocha or Jasmine on top of it, and that'll give you the choice. I think after that, the blessing becomes easier.
Okay, yeah, because I think that as a new developer coming to testing, there's a lot to figure out first. You have to figure out what's velocity in relation to all the rest of them, and you've answered that question. It's a test runner. You have to figure out which framework among the competing ones, like Mocha and Jasmine. You have to figure out what what parts of your own system you want to test in which way. Sometimes unit, sometimes integration or end to end. So it's really I think helpful to have a little bit of guidance on that. I guess that's where your book comes in.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I'm going straight for, I chose Jasmine and Cucumber, and that's exactly what I'm following through the book as well. So yeah, that the book will help there. I think just to rewind back a tiny bit on what you were saying about the framework, I would say, Velocity at the moment is a meta framework, is a testing framework, and people think that Velocity is the testing approach. And so you're absolutely right that what we really need to do is just say, okay, you install Velocity, this is what you get as a default, and this is how you do stuff with the default. Just like with Meteor, you get everything in JavaScript. But then if you want to extend it, you add a package such as, you know, like Jasmine, and then you can then use CoffeeScript instead of JavaScript in the same way, as you'd be able to do the same thing with testing. So that would be a nice end goal, and hopefully we're going to get there.
Yeah,
Uh,
and also as a as a starting point, you actually don't. I think you don't start with velocity, right? You start with. I mean, you would install Jasmine, and that would pull in velocity. So it might even help to have one sort of velocity package to add as a starting point, and it could pull in a couple of recommended frameworks by perhaps by default.
right.
But anyway, that's bound to be controversial. I'm sure. I'm a fan of opinions.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So what's the state of the project? Is it ready to use? Because I notice on your on the roadmap Trello board that you have, it's still says there's a column for still to do for Velocity 1.0. But I've been using it and noticing that it's becoming a lot more stable lately, and I think it feels ready to use. But what's the official word?
So the official word is it's still zero point 0.5.
Uh-huh.
And it's definitely not 1.0 yet. We know what really needs, what's broken, and we know what's just a nuisance. And so I think once we've fixed the broken bits and made the nuisances a more streamlined journey, then it will be 1.0. So how long is it looking like? I mean, the only problem right now is that this is an open source project. It's got a bunch of fantastic volunteers that have are all chipping in their personal time, and so that's the thing that's holding it back right now is time. So the state of the project is depending on people being able to commit time. However, we've done a couple of changes recently to make better use of our time. So our meetings on Thursdays are now becoming mini sprints where we go and fix everything, like little bugs and things. And you'd also be glad to know that not this week, next week, I'll be dedicating pretty much a whole week for Velocity, to really like make it move forward a leap or something. So maybe we can get it closer to 1.0 by the end of this week. But there's like we have to fix the fundamentally broken problem, which is currently around mirrors. So mirrors work. They've got a lot better over time, and mirrors are a replica of your main application that run in the background, so that you don't affect your main app when you're running tests. And so we've now learned even more lessons from what we've tried, and we think we've got the solution sussed. So it's just a case of implementing it now.
Cool. Do you want to talk a little bit about that technically? So you,
Sure, yeah, of course. So the way we started mirrors, first of all, which is copied from RTD, was what we called an rsync mirror. And that is every time you save a file, your entire file system for your application is rsynced minus the Meteor directory. And then a separate Meteor process, so you have two Meteors running, would detect the file changes just like any normal Meteor process, and then it would rebuild the app, and then the tests would run.
right.
This is how rsync mirrors started. Now, that was chuggy because the bigger your app was, the more package building you had to do. So the longer you had to wait before you got feedback. So if your main application took 10 seconds to build, you'd have to wait 20 seconds for your test to start.
Right. Because
Right?
so the mirror is another copy of your app running, and when you were using rsync to copy your project to a whole copy of the project to start up the mirror, then both of them had to have the same startup time, and
Correct.
that was not in parallel. That was one after the other. Okay.
Correct. That was serial as well. So
Okay.
that was quite painful. And that's what created for a lot of people this image that velocity is just this slow, chuggy thing. So then we put our heads together, and then we came up with a new approach, which is after the Meteor process finishes building, we then go to the main.js file that was built and run a node process straight onto that file. And so the time was then cut from up from like 20 seconds to exact like to 30 milliseconds.
Hmm.
So now as soon as your app is finished building, bang, like the node process starts up. So that's what's currently in there right now. It's a super fast startup time from a mirror point of view, but there's still a lot of life cycle management that we're not doing correctly yet. So that's the nuisance because the mirror starts, tests haven't run yet, or the tests have started running, and they're not like there's not a connection yet. So there's all this handshaking we're trying to do to stage it. And I call it handshaking, but really they're just patches on top of something that we can redesign and make a lot more stable just by having a correct life cycle.
Hmm.
So that's one of the things that we're going to go and implement now. The next thing is the mirror itself, like I said, is a node process. We're actually going to go back to using a Meteor process, but this time with lessons learned from how Meteor test packages works, which will run as a separate Meteor process. It does watch the file system. So if we watch the file system using Meteor, it means that we don't have to build our own file watchers, which we currently do. And so the reason we want to go back to this process is because now we can have more control over the Meteor build process, and we can pre-process files, post-process files, and do a bunch of things that Meteor normally doesn't allow you to do. So let me rephrase what the new mirror approach is going to look like. It's more a test environment as opposed to like a mirror, which is still the same name. And what it does is it overrides the Meteor, like the main Meteor branch, and we create our own Meteor branch. And inside there, we can mess with the Meteor internals. And what we're doing is putting in hooks. So to know, the system has been built, or we need to instrument the code, we need to pre-compile, we need to add some things. We can do all that stuff now, and we can do that separately to the main Meteor process.
You said Meteor branch earlier. I didn't follow that. Could you explain that part? What do you mean
Sure.
by branch?
So it's a tracked version of Meteor. So you got Meteor 1.0.4 right now. We would create a velocity maintained 1.0.4, which is exactly the same, but that only runs your test environment. It does not run your main app. So when you deploy your main app, you still use the main Meteor. And then the only reason we're doing this is so that we can get some finer control over the build process. And eventually, the MDG have been very good with us, with the Velocity team. Eventually, we'll just merge these. Like once we understand what these changes are going to be, then the MDG is usually quite happy for us to work with us and make these part of core.
Okay.
But we have to prove it ourselves first to ourselves to make sure that we're asking the right questions.
Okay, cool. So you meant branch in the Git repo. Okay, I was thinking we were talking about something runtime. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Um, so what about using it for package level testing?
Yeah.
Like,
So
and how
go
does it
ahead.
relate to Tiny Test?
So Tiny Test is the MDG's own creation for testing packages. What the what the when you say Meteor dash test packages, or when you go into Tiny Test mode, what happens is Meteor unravels, if you like, all the packages that are normally closed within the package namespace, and it puts them all on the main namespace so that you can access them and test them. And so that's really what it's doing is it's exposing the code and then appending a bunch of helpers, which is what the tiny test, assertions and things like that do. So MochaWeb has recently, Mike's MochaWeb, he's recently copied this approach, and instead of putting tiny tests in, he's just put MochaWeb in instead. And now he's able to use Mocha to do the package testing the same way the MDG does it with tiny test. So that's the way, that's the current blessed way to do package testing.
Okay.
And in doing this, it means that you can really get down to fine detail of unit and integration testing at the package level. There is another way to do package testing with the existing frameworks, and that is that you create a test application. So let's say you've got a package. Right around that package, you create an application that has a link that uses your package, and then you test your package through the main app.
Right.
So if it uses DDP, then you'd make DDP calls from the main app, or if that package puts something on the page, then you'd test that things are being put on the page.
Right. Makes sense. Okay. So that's a great explanation so far. So what has been the biggest challenge of building the framework? Has it been political or technical?
For velocity,
Yeah,
building
for
velocity.
velocity.
It is time more than anything,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah, we've got. I think between the team, like I'm blessed to work with such an amazing team. The team's got some amazing ideas and knowledge, and skills. And if we were to be in a one room, say for like a couple of weeks, velocity would probably be complete.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Cool. So you guys did a video at one of the recent dev shops. You and Mike Risi. You showed parallel testing, and then you showed it locally, and then on the cloud. So tell us a little bit about that. That was pretty awesome.
Thanks. So the thing with end-to-end tests is that they're slow, and if you go into any company, that you find that they give up their end-to-end tests. Like once they get to 100 tests or 1,000 tests, these things are taking hours and hours, and that's far too slow a feedback cycle for anyone. So it's always been a gripe for companies, and so parallel testing feeds on the mirrors approach, and what we do is because Meteor runs as a whole end-to-end stack. So you've got the database all the way through to the client, and this all runs inside a mirror. We can now start lots of these mirrors, and we can have lots of different applications, and we can run tests against them in parallel. And so Velocity is already built in a distributed way because it supports multiple frameworks and supports multiple mirrors. And so to hack together an approach that does parallel testing was actually fairly easy to do with because of the way Meteor is built end to end, because of the way Velocity supports mirrors, and because of the way its distributed reporting allows different frameworks to report at the same time. We hacked that together and made something that can do end-to-end tests and solve a real business problem, which is that your end-to-end tests can now go from taking hours to taking seconds.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So the mirrors, you already had mirrors to isolate the test environment from the actual development version of your app. So now you're just running lots of them to isolate from each other, and you can run all your tests in parallel. And
correct.
so in your demo, when you did it on the cloud, and now it looked like it was one big machine, right?
Right.
Um, are you going to eventually be able to scale those across multiple machines? Like, are you going to make it horizontally scalable? I guess you need some sort of orchestration between them.
Absolutely. Yep. The way that we did it for the demo was just one, like you said, one big VM, and it could hold 40. In fact, the machine could do much more than 40 mirrors. But after 40 mirrors, we started getting, like threading issues and things because it was too many. We're not handling that many cases in Velocity as it is right now, so we need some work there. But you're absolutely right. Like in the direction we want to take it, yes, that's where it's going to go. And to do that, we're going to use Docker, and then we'd have to do some smarts around like who starts a test, when a test starts, when it ends, and it will more likely go into a queuing system. So what I've got in mind is to build something like Amazon, using Amazon SQS or similar,
Hmm.
where tests become distributed. So you can put all these tests in a queue, and then the mirrors are like workers that go and finish a job and post back results. And if we build it in this asynchronous fashion, then should be able to scale across different machines.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Even running 40 workers together on one huge machine was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That was like, what was it, 80 seconds down to a couple of seconds?
Right.
That's pretty awesome. Okay, cool.
Yeah, but there's no reason why we can't scale this to thousands of machines that can, and then your tests will take as long as your longest running test takes.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah.
So, okay, so if you come to Meteor or even to JavaScript from other languages, there's a couple things that you find are a little bit more complex. So first of all, there's asynchronous code in JavaScript, but in Meteor you also have the concept of reactivity. So what patterns do you follow for testing reactive code in Meteor? So something that might be run and rerun again multiple times with a different state than what your test expects. How do you handle that?
That's a great question. So depends at which level. If it's an end-to-end level, then it's very easy because you just say click a button and wait for something to happen. All right, that's it. That's all you got to do.
So what if that something happens multiple times? Like if a subscription is coming in and then you want to test the state of say something else on your page, but maybe that you have to wait until a subscription is ready, for example, for it to look the way you want it to look.
Gotcha. So the question then becomes, how do you trigger a new change to the subscription so that you can get the update? So some of those changes might be triggered through the UI, as in I press a button, I wait, and something happens. Another thing might be that I don't actually do anything. The feed comes from stock prices changing somewhere, for example.
Right.
And so what you do then is you create a fixture, which is a backdoor into your system, and you hit that fixture from the end-to-end test as part of your test run. So then you'd say, all right, for example, if this is using Gherkin syntax, because that's how I think now when it comes to testing, given I'm on the stock page, the ticker page, when the stock price changes, then I expect to see the price update on my screen. Now, the stock price changing is not something that the user can do, but what you can say is when stock price changes, you can have that as an entry point to a fixture on your system, which will then trigger the change on the back end. And so that will then force the front end to go through your app to go through an execution path that will update the screen. And so the magic there is that when you're doing end-to-end tests, for reactivity is that you just simply wait for things to happen. And if you want to trigger events that are not in the system, then you can use backdoors and fixtures.
Okay.
So that's for end-to-end tests. And then for integration tests, it's a similar thing. If you're testing from a UI level, you can still access jQuery. So if the DOM's going to change, which is typically what reactivity means, mostly, because of Blaze. I mean, that's how people use reactivity mostly. Then you can do exactly the same thing by waiting for things to happen at at the DOM level. So you can say set interval, for example, and you can keep polling it until it happens, and you can build a little helper that can do that often for you.
Right.
In fact, that's probably something we should give away in the Velocity core for free, because I'm sure people would use that a lot.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. So it's something that you typically build into a test yourself, and it would maybe do a set a timeout and then check for its expectation.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one way. Another way is to actually tap into the reactivity yourself, and make sure you're in there. I'm a fan of doing outside in testing. So if you look at sort of like a circuit board and you try and test the circuit board by putting your some wires in there, you might short circuit something. But if you're looking at it with a pair of glasses and you've got some laser investigating things and other apparatus that allow you to inspect without touching, then that's my preferred methods for testing. So you can tap into reactivity, and I think that's a mistake actually people often do when they're writing tests, is they interwingle it into their code. So then that's why I would use things like set timeout. Different people have different opinions on this sort of thing. So that's one way to do reactivity. Another one is to when you're setting up an integration test, is to create, for example, a subscription, like subscribe to a publication, and then make some changes to the database, and then see that the subscription updates correctly. And if you're drawing the boundary at the front end, for example, where you're waiting for a publication to come in, then you don't even have to touch the publication. You can just invoke the effect of the publication by putting in the data that the function needs. So
Right.
to get away from abstract, if that was in a template, instead of having a subscription, I would just set the data context of a template, and then I'd be able to know if it reacts or
Okay.
if the value's in there correctly.
Cool. So is your book going to cover some of this type of stuff?
Yes, so I've just finished the template chapter actually, and something about the book is that it's two things really, or actually it's three parts. There's a theory section, which is to teach you the background of testing, what the different phrases mean and so forth, and the different techniques are. And then there's the practical aspect, which is going through and building an application called Letterpress. And that's a book publishing application. And eventually I'm going to move the book to it because the book right now is just a hack together piece application that I did very quickly. And then the third part is the reference. And that's where, you've got a car manual, you should be able to go back to the reference and go, how do I test templates again? Or how do I do that part of a method again? How do you get authentication? And the idea of the different reference chapters is to go back and just use them as reference. So the template chapter is the first reference chapter that's complete now, and I've covered as much as I think needs to be covered right now. But I'm waiting for feedback as well from people. And if somebody tells me that something's not covered, which actually happened this morning, then I'm going to work with them and get that chapter to a fuller, concise reference.
Okay, cool.
So the answer is yes, I will eventually once I go through all the feedback and all the different types of things in Meteor.
Okay, cool. So let's talk a bit about the book. So this is right now. This is the one Meteor testing book. The name of the book is the Meteor Testing Manual, and what's the state of it?
So I have got most of the like the theory chapters done. There's a couple that still need work. I'm starting to do so in terms of if you want to get started with testing and learn what testing means and what the different techniques are, then it's in a great place. If you are wanting to have a full end-to-end tutorial, I'm kind of at the beginning of that. So I've got letterpress part 1 and 2, which covers Cucumber and Jasmine and just getting started with it. But I haven't really got into the meat of like how to do subscription testing, how to do method testing. And the biggest reason for that is because Velocity has not been ready yet. So it's been for me switching between working on Velocity, making sure that things are present, jumping back to the book, working on the book, working on my own application,
Yeah,
and pushing through. So the book I would say is about just finger in the air is about 30% complete right now.
okay,
And it's going to be hand in hand with the completion of Velocity, I think, until you'll probably see the delivery of the book with the delivery of Velocity 1.0.
awesome. Yeah, I was speaking with Josh Owens last week, and he mentioned having his experience writing a little bit about testing and velocity and the fact that it was a moving target. So it's good that you're actually working on both.
Right.
And so people can buy it now, right? And have access to what you're working on.
Absolutely. So right now the price is still $29 and that's because I'm in it's in beta mode. So it's a work in progress, and yes, it's available right now. And there's a couple of chapters that you can, well, sorry, one chapter, the Velocity chapter, that you get for free. I should probably give another one away. And yeah, you can please go ahead right now and do it.
Awesome. Okay, so you can get it now while it's still only $29 and just follow along the progress. Okay, very cool.
There is also I've also got planned a advanced section. So that's the premium chapters. Those will cover the three things that I'd like to cover in there are mobile testing, advanced UI testing, and performance testing. So mobile testing, that's using Cordova. That's not been covered yet with Velocity. So as we dig into Velocity, then I'll open that guy up. And then the advanced UI testing is allowing you to do things like drag and drop, open up two windows, press something in one window, make sure it happened in the other, that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
And then performance testing is exactly what it says on the tin, how to what new tools to use to grind your app to a halt and see what your limits are.
Cool, including load testing and
Correct.
and maybe for performance of the UI as well.
Yep. Performance of the UI, probably not. You'll have to talk to Aronodo about that. He's the king. He's the king on that front.
Awesome. Yeah, well, Kadira definitely helpful for all those kinds of things. Okay. So Velocity is the official test framework. So I'm just curious, what role does MDG play in all of this?
They've been
The
supportive.
Meteor Development Group, that is.
Yeah, they've been supportive. We have had a few ad hoc meetings with the MDG. When we first started Velocity, we met with Jeff and, we synced up our visions. And then more recently, Mike and I went and met Matt and Avatal and a bunch of people and David Glasser. And, we spoke about the state of things today. So that, they're in touch. They're in touch with the progress. They were ecstatic when we first started doing this because the community just took on the testing piece.
Yeah.
I think now we've got to a stage where we are closer to needing their help, and so we've started talking about what that looks like in terms of what support we need from the MDG. Is there's specifics that we need them to help us with, and also when you say Meteor dash dash test, that's actually Velocity maintained code. The Velocity team maintains the code that does the dash dash test. So that's a tool. So they're pretty open to us doing pull requests and asking them for things. So they're playing a support role right now. Is the answer to your question?
Okay.
I don't know what that's going to look like in the future.
Cool. Do you think they promote or encourage testing enough?
Not at the moment. However, we've also spoken about having more of Velocity in the docs. So I think as Velocity gets closer, maybe we'll be able to get some more With the ideal state, I mean, there's no commitment to any of this yet, but the ideal state is that we would be able to have a testing section on the Meteor Docs site.
Yeah, I would love to see it in the docs. I would love to see it in the example apps as well.
Hmm.
So when you do Meteor create dash dash example, whatever leaderboard, I would love to see those have velocity tests right in there.
Yeah.
Um,
Funny you mentioned that. Sorry, that's actually something we have spoken about, and yeah, there's willingness.
that's great. Yeah, I think Meteor needs a stronger testing culture personally. I came from, well, originally I came from Java, and there was a pretty, I mean, I guess Java was pretty diverse, so a lot of people were into at least JUnit, things like that. But then I moved to Rails, and Rails had a very strong testing culture, and I think part of the reason why is because it was built right into the core, and it was something that people just kind of took for granted because as the community started to grow, you would just find that all the existing code, the existing apps that you saw as example apps, the projects that you would use as plugins and things, those generally had tests available, and there was a very clear template of what to use, and a very opinionated, a strong opinion from the Rails core team, or at least from David Heinemeier Hansen about which framework to use. Not that everybody agreed with it, but I think that it's really good to have that there as a strong part of the culture. So that actually brings me to another question. So TDD, how do you feel about test TDD being test driven development? How do you feel about test first?
I feel very strongly about it. I encourage it. I would actually go a bit further out, though. I think more recent developments of test-driven development have brought it, to new bounds. So you've got TDD, which is considered as a development sort of practice, and then you've got BDD, behavior-driven development, which is from a syntax point of view, it's actually not very different, but from a like business process approach, it involves more of the business because now you're stating the behavior of your system and not just testing what the system does. It's less what the system does and it's more about what the behavior should be of your system. And so, in TDD, you would say it should behave. It should like I don't know. You're asserting that the system is working in a certain way, whereas when you say BDD, you're saying that here's this business requirement and that's what should happen. And this is where I would, this is what like my preference is to start with Gherkin in English and drive your entire specification through something that is testable. Now, should you do TDD? Let's say you're doing a startup, right? And you're now building a product. Should you start off building everything test driven or behavior driven or specification driven or whatever driven? That's a question I actually get asked quite often. If I'm starting a brand new project, should I employ test-driven techniques, from scratch? And as you asked me a few years ago, I would have said, absolutely, there's no other way, right? But now having done a couple of startups myself and seen the grind and seen how, when you're under the pressure to produce, I would actually say now the right thing to do is to first build something as quickly as you can and get it out there and test it and make sure that it works with people in terms of what you're building is the right thing. Do have some tests, but make sure they're minimal and make sure they're just testing some happy path. As soon as you found that this is something that you're not going to throw away, that this is not just an experiment, it's something you're going to keep, and especially if it becomes something critical and part of your core business, then block and brace that thing down and even rewrite it, but rewrite it with test-driven or behavior-driven approach or X-driven technique. That would be my advice.
It can be hard to take your foot off the gas and all of a sudden or hard maybe to convince the client or the business stakeholders or whatever that you need to not show progress for a few weeks and write a lot of
Right,
tests, but
right.
I would say important. So right, and when you start doing that, then you would start writing tests first.
Yeah, and then yeah, straight after, I personally developed my most recent startup, which I will be announcing soon, and I might give you a tiny bit of info about that in a second.
I was going to ask because you teased about it in your newsletter this morning. So
That's right. So the way that we do that is we build, we build, and then we've got like quite a lot of testing now over the app. And then if we have a new idea, then we just create a new folder called experiment in Meteor, which is great because in Meteor, anything under experiment now will still get compiled to the main code. And inside there, we can write non-tested code. We can work with customers. We can work with people, make sure that that is a good experiment. And then the time to move that experiment, it makes it very easy to go, everything that's here needs to be moved out either with tests or rewritten with tests. So yeah, that's how I do it. That's how I do it.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to ask
So
about. Sorry, go ahead.
so go ahead. Now you were you gonna ask about the startup just then?
I'm going to ask
Yeah.
about your. I'm going to ask about your startup. You're working
So I'll
on a
tell you that
product.
it has some. It's to do with Cucumber. It is actually I'm pushing Cucumber up further. It is something that it will allow you to do end-to-end tests for any application, Meteor or not, really really quickly, and get started like right off the bat without having to set up infrastructure and processes, because end-to-end testing typically is hard to do. Velocity does it, makes it easy, but for other applications and even still with Meteor, it can be difficult to get your head around and then to run it as part of your suite and everything else. So I'm making it really really easy for people to do that, to do
Cool.
end-to-end testing.
And does this help business stakeholders read and maybe edit your Gherkin files as well? Gherkin being
Absolutely.
the plain English the plain English description of how your app is supposed to work.
Yes, absolutely. So people are able to have a single source of truth, where you should be specifying what your app should do, and you can use that to as a reference documentation to build your app, and then also to automate your tests from. And it's the single place for specification. It's a single specification library.
I'm really looking forward to this.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you have any timeline or
Weeks.
weeks? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Um,
Thank you.
okay, so if our listeners would like to get a hold of you, how can they do so?
So I'm on Twitter. You can find me using the Solvio handle, or you can use Sam Hatoum, Sam underscore Hatoum. I'm pretty sure it's an underscore. Um,
Solvio being XOLVIO.
that's correct. Yep. So Twitter's a good one. Otherwise, I usually hang out in the forums.meteor.com under the Velocity channel, over the Velocity category. And of course, you can talk to me through the book itself as well. So meteortesting.com, there's a blog, you can comment in there, and inside the book, I'm always very quick to respond.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you.